You ever feel the tension in a room so thick you could butter your goddamn roll with it? That's what Thanksgiving felt like at our house that year. One of those big, stupid Norman Rockwell dinners with a turkey at the center like it's some kind of peace treaty, but everyone at the table is just one glass of wine away from going full emotional civil war. My name's Ethan, I'm 39, single, and if you ask my mother, I'm still figuring things out. If you ask Grandma Ruth, well, she wouldn't answer anymore, not after what happened that night and the 2 days that followed. It started like it always did. Hannah, my older sister by 3 years, showed up looking like she stepped out of a Pottery Barn catalog. Hair blown out, makeup done, kids in tow, one boy, one girl, both too quiet, both probably bribed with iPads in the car. Her husband Matt, wearing that same smug face he always had, the one that said, "I'm doing well and I don't even have to try." I pulled up in my '08 Corolla with a dented front fender and a box of cheap red wine. And yes, I'm well aware of the symbolism. Inside, the table was already set. Sharon, our mother, had gone full Martha Stewart, white candles, matching plates, cloth napkins folded into some kind of origami swans. The house smelled like turkey, stuffing, and something overly sweet. Probably that goddamn marshmallow yam thing Hannah insists on making every year. Grandma Ruth sat at the head of the table, like always, wearing her pearls and that maroon cardigan she pulls out for every holiday. She was sharp, eyes like razors even in her 80s, and she missed absolutely nothing. That woman could clock a bad haircut from across the damn room and ruin your self-esteem in 5 words or less. Dinner went as expected, small talk, polite insults wrapped in compliments, stories we've all heard a dozen times. I mostly stayed quiet, nodded, and poured myself a generous glass of wine every time the room got a little too warm with passive aggression. And then, as the plates were cleared and dessert hit the table, the moment happened. The one no one would forget. Grandma lifted her wine glass, still nearly full, because she sipped like a nun and looked around the table with that dry little smile of hers. She said, "Well, at least one of you turned out marriage material," and then nodded slowly, deliberately, in Hannah's direction. Just like that, the air left the room. It wasn't even the words, it was the way she said it. Like it was a punchline to a joke only she thought was funny. Hannah smiled like it was nothing, shrugged it off with that practiced grace she had. But I saw it. Her left eyebrow twitched, and her hand curled around her fork a little tighter. Me? I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because what the hell else do you do when your own grandmother drops a backhanded insult so casually you wonder if she even knows how deep it cuts? I stood up and reached for the wine bottle. "More for the rest of us, I guess," I said. I poured for Mom, who gave me that tight-lipped look that meant, "Please, Ethan, not today," and for myself, and then for Grandma. She gave me a look. Not a grateful one. Not even annoyed. Just curious. Like she was trying to see if I'd say something. And I almost did. I had it right there on the tip of my tongue, something sharp, something cruel, something true. But instead, I smiled and topped off her glass. "To marriage material," I said. And then I sat back down and drank like I was trying to forget something I hadn't remembered yet. Later, after the kids went to bed and the dishes were stacked, I stayed behind. I always did. I told myself it was to help Mom clean up, but really, it was just to avoid the weird, quiet ride home alone. Hannah and Matt left early, probably had another dinner to hit or some Friendsgiving thing with their polished crew of wine-swilling couples. It was just me, Mom, and Grandma after that. The house felt empty without the noise of kids and casserole dishes clinking. Mom disappeared into the laundry room to deal with a wine spill. Grandma sat in the living room, glass still mostly untouched, and I sat across from her, swirling my own. The TV was on, but muted. One of those Hallmark movies where everyone's problems get fixed with a snowball fight and a kiss on the porch. Grandma stared at the screen like it owed her money. I don't know why I asked her. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was that goddamn comment, maybe it was 30-some years of not saying anything finally boiling over. But I leaned forward and said, "You ever actually like me, Grandma? Or did you just tolerate me for Mom's sake?" She didn't answer right away. Just blinked, then looked at me over her glasses like she wasn't sure I was being serious. Then she said, "You were always difficult, Ethan. Even as a baby, you cried too loud." And that was that. Like crying too loud was a character flaw. I nodded. Right. But I never had the right haircut, huh? That got the smallest twitch of a smile. "You always wanted someone to feel sorry for you," she said. And I said, "No, I wanted someone to notice." And then she looked away. Not toward the TV, but toward the hallway, where all the family photos hung, the wall of memories with all the happy faces and none of the missing ones. She said something then, something quiet. "What your father did. Some things are better left alone." My mouth went dry. I hadn't heard her talk about Dad in years. He died when I was 16, and after that, his name was a ghost. A birthday card in a box, a blurry photo on a shelf no one dusted. "What did he do?" I asked. My voice was low. I wasn't ready for the answer. "Not really." She didn't answer. Her face shut down like a machine powering off. Not angry. Just gone. I sat there, glass in hand, thinking of all the things I could say, should say, didn't say. And finally I said, "I think you've kept too many things quiet for too long." She didn't speak after that. Not that night. Not the next day. Not ever again, as far as anyone could tell. But I didn't know that yet. That night I drove home, alone. The sky was too clear, the roads too empty, and my head was full of noise. I didn't know what I'd said exactly. I didn't think it was much. But 2 days later, Hannah would call me in a panic, her voice shaky, asking me what the hell I did. And I'd have to ask myself the same thing, over and over again. Did I say something? Or did I just finally make her remember? The call came in just before noon on Saturday, the kind of gray-skied day that already felt heavy with something unsaid, like the world was waiting for someone to blink first. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee and knee-deep in pretending to reorganize the mess I called a kitchen when my phone lit up with Hannah's name. Now, for most people, a call from your sister might be a pleasant surprise or a mild inconvenience, depending on the week. But for me, it always came wrapped in tension, like opening a letter you know is from the IRS. I picked up on the third ring, pretending I hadn't been staring at the screen. "Ethan," she said, sharp like a slap of cold water, no hello, no warmth, just my name in that panicked, clipped tone I hadn't heard since the night our dad died. "What's wrong?" I said, straightening up without meaning to, like I was about to be scolded. "Have you talked to Grandma since Thanksgiving?" she asked, and I could already feel my stomach shift gears. "No," I said. "Why?" "She's not talking, Ethan," Hannah said, and I swear I could hear the sound of her pacing. Like, not at all. Not to Mom, not to me, not even to the kids. "What do you mean, not talking?" I asked, heart beginning to drum louder, a slow, stupid thud. "Like, not returning calls?" "No, I mean she's not speaking," she said, her voice rising. Like something snapped, and she's just gone silent. "We tried calling, then we went over there this morning. She just sits there in that damn chair and stares at the wall like she's waiting to die." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to breathe properly for a second. I leaned on the counter with one hand and closed my eyes. "That doesn't make any sense," I muttered. "Well," she snapped. "Did you say something?" "What?" I said, caught off guard. "At Thanksgiving?" "No, I mean, not really." "Not really?" she asked, sharp and accusing. "Jesus, Ethan, what the hell does that mean?" "I stayed late," I admitted. "We talked a little." She made some offhand comment about Dad. I asked what she meant. "That's it." "You asked her about Dad?" Hannah said, her voice shifting from anger to something more cautious. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've been walking around with question marks in my chest since I was 16, I said, louder than I meant to. "Because maybe I'm tired of everyone pretending like he was just some working-class saint who had a heart attack and left no mess behind." She went quiet for a second. I could hear her breathing and the clink of something in the background, probably her husband fixing another damn smoothie. So, what exactly did she say? She said, "What your father did. Some things are better left alone," I answered. And then she went quiet. Just like that. "You think that's what did it?" she asked, quieter now, more like she was trying to understand than accuse. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I didn't say anything cruel. I asked a question she didn't want to answer." There was another pause. Then she said, "Well, she hasn't spoken since." Not one word. We had to call the doctor. They said her vitals are fine, no stroke, no physical reason for it. She just stopped. Like someone flipped a switch. I didn't know how to respond to that. I kept thinking of her face that night, the way her eyes moved away from me, not out of shame, but like someone hearing something faint and terrible from far away. I didn't say anything damning. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just made her remember. She looked at me like she knew something I didn't, I finally said. And then she shut the door without slamming it. "You're not making sense," Hannah said, now sounding exhausted. "We're going back tomorrow. Can you come?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'll be there." After we hung up, I didn't move. I just stood there in my apartment, surrounded by dirty dishes and unread books, staring out the window like the answer might float by in the clouds. What was it about families that made silence more dangerous than screaming? Why did the words we didn't say cut deeper than the ones we did? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the TV on low, some old war movie playing with too much brass and shouting, and kept replaying Thanksgiving in my head. I saw Grandma's face again and again, that slight shift in her eyes when I brought up Dad, the way she seemed to collapse inward without changing expression. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was older than guilt. It was the look of someone remembering a secret they'd kept so long they forgot it was still dangerous. And I kept thinking, what if it wasn't what I said, but what she heard? What if I had brushed up against something that had been buried under years of casseroles and family jokes and Christmas cards with fake smiles? What if the only reason she ever kept talking was because no one had ever asked the right question? The next morning, I went looking through a box of old family photos I hadn't touched in years. Most of them were standard fare, birthdays, vacations, awkward smiles, but one caught my eye. A photo from the early 90s, me and Hannah sitting on the front steps of Grandma's old house, both holding melting popsicles. Our dad stood behind us, smiling, hand on Hannah's shoulder. Grandma stood next to him, smiling too, but her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at him. And I swear, there was something in that look. Not affection. Not pride. Something closer to fear. I didn't sleep much after that. And I couldn't help but wonder, if silence was her punishment, what the hell was she punishing herself for? Hannah showed up at my place the next morning before I had the chance to finish my first coffee, and if you've ever had a sibling show up unannounced while you're still in boxers and an undershirt, you'll understand the immediate spike of dread that hit me. She knocked like a cop, 3 sharp bangs, and I knew from the sound alone that she wasn't here for small talk or reconciliation. She was here for answers, and she wasn't leaving without something to chew on. I opened the door and didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You look like shit," she said, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation, her tone somewhere between worry and exasperation, the kind of tone only a sister can use without getting punched. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, scratching the back of my head and closing the door behind her. She was already pacing by the kitchen island, arms folded across her chest, hair tied up in that annoyed bun she always wore when something had gone sideways. She spun around and fixed me with a look that could have peeled paint. "What did she mean, Ethan? What the hell did she mean when she said, 'What your father did'?" I didn't answer right away because, truthfully, I didn't know. I'd been chewing on it for 2 nights straight, turning it over like a rock in my hand, hoping for a clue, something more than just dread and static. I poured myself a cup of coffee and offered her one, which she declined with a wave of her hand like caffeine couldn't help what was boiling in her veins. She said it like it was a warning, I said finally, voice low, steady. Like she'd spent the last 20 years trying not to say it. She's not speaking, Hannah snapped, as if I hadn't already heard that fact 10 times. She sits there, Ethan. Like a ghost. Like someone sucked the soul right out of her. You think that's nothing? You think that's normal? No, I said, staring at my coffee like it might give me courage. I think she remembered something she's spent her whole life trying to forget. And maybe that memory is louder than words. Oh, for God's sake, Hannah said, throwing her hands up. Don't get poetic on me now. We need facts, not metaphors. She never liked me, I said abruptly, and that stopped her in her tracks. You know that, right? I was never the favorite. Not once. Not when I got good grades, not when I played Little League, not even when I graduated college. You were the golden child. I was just around. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For once, she didn't deny it. I stayed late that night, I continued, and I asked her if she ever liked me. Just straight out. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't being a smartass. I just wanted the truth for once. And she said I cried too much as a baby. That I was difficult. Jesus, Hannah said under her breath, rubbing her forehead. So what? You think she's punishing herself now? I don't know, I admitted. But I don't think this started with what I said. I think what I said opened a door. One she's been guarding for decades. We sat in silence for a while after that. The kind of silence that doesn't offer peace, just space to breathe in the wrong kind of air. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, noticed the way her fingers tapped against the counter, like she was counting seconds she couldn't afford to lose. You remember Dad crying in the garage? I asked suddenly, and that made her blink. She looked up, confused. No. When? I was maybe 10. I'd snuck out to get a soda from the garage fridge. Found him sitting on that old milk crate, just crying. No noise, just his shoulders shaking. He didn't see me. She didn't respond. But I could see it on her face, some memory stirring, something she hadn't touched in years. I never told anyone, I said, because I didn't know what it meant. But now I wonder, what the hell was he crying about? You think he did something, she said quietly. I think Grandma thinks he did, I replied. And I think she's been holding on to that thought, or guilt, or whatever the hell it is, for longer than we know. Hannah sat down finally, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor like it had secrets. She always protected him, she said. Even after he died. Remember when you asked about the arguments? She said it was just marriage stuff, always brushing it off. I remember, I said. And I remember him looking at her like he owed her something. Not love. Not gratitude. Something heavier. Another silence passed. This one tighter. She's sick, Ethan, Hannah said eventually. Not physically, but something's not right. And if you're right, if she's remembering something awful, what the hell do we do with that? I didn't have an answer. I didn't have anything close to one. But I knew that whatever Grandma Ruth was running from, it hadn't stayed buried. Not really. It had just been lying dormant, waiting for a trigger. I think the past finally caught up with her, I said. And now it's crawling into the rest of us. Hannah stood and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. She turned back and looked at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. If she doesn't start talking, she said, we're going to have to find out what happened without her. And I don't know if I want to. And then she left, door closing with the softest click, like even the house didn't want to disturb whatever truth was starting to wake up. I sat back down, finished my cold coffee, and stared at the ceiling. The thing about family secrets is they don't die. They just wait until someone's careless enough to say the wrong thing at the right time. And somehow I'd done exactly that. By the time I pulled up to Grandma's house the next day, the sky had gone the color of wet cement and the wind had that quiet, bitter edge that made you feel like something was watching, like even the weather was holding its breath. The house itself sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in that way old houses do when they've seen more than they ever wanted to, shutters slightly crooked, porch creaking with memory, the lawn trimmed just enough to suggest someone still cared, even if the house didn't anymore. I parked across the street and sat for a minute with the engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might float away if I let go. I wasn't even sure why I came, only that something inside me was pulling me toward that place with a kind of magnetic shame, the way people return to car crashes or old wounds that never quite healed right. I rang the bell once and waited, though I already knew nobody was going to answer it. Grandma was inside, yes, but she wasn't really there anymore. Mom was likely at work, Hannah had the kids, and I figured I had a window to look around without anyone trying to stop me. After the silence confirmed what I already knew, I used the spare key under the frog-shaped planter by the steps, same one that had been there since the early 90s, and let myself in. The house smelled the way it always had, a mixture of dust, lavender, and cooked onions that had somehow taken up permanent residence in the walls. I stood in the entryway and listened, just in case, but there were no footsteps, no sounds of a television or dishes being rinsed. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft groan of the wood beneath my feet. I made my way past the living room, where Grandma's chair sat facing the window like a throne abandoned mid-sentence. The blanket she always kept folded neatly on the armrest was draped across the cushion instead, like she'd left in a hurry or maybe never came back. I didn't linger there. Instead, I headed toward the basement door. It hadn't changed in 30 years, still that same peeling white paint and loose doorknob you had to jiggle just right. I opened it slowly, each creak of the hinges sounding like a warning. The stairs were narrow, and the overhead light flickered before finally staying on, casting a dim glow that made everything down there look more secret than it probably was. The basement was divided into two parts. One side was laundry, washer, dryer, old sink stained with rust. The other was storage, the graveyard of forgotten things, holiday decorations, boxes of old papers, tools, furniture wrapped in sheets. I started with the boxes, not even sure what I was looking for. Something that explained the silence. Something that explained why a woman like Ruth, sharp-tongued, unapologetic, and practically immortal, would suddenly go mute after one conversation. After 20 minutes of digging, I found a box that made my chest tighten before I even touched it. It was labeled in thick black marker, Dawn, private. Dawn, as in my father. The handwriting was unmistakably Grandma's, rigid, no curves, all capital letters like she wanted to make damn sure no one misread her meaning. I pulled it from the shelf and sat cross-legged on the cement floor like I was 8 years old again, about to open a treasure chest or a curse. Inside were papers, envelopes, old photographs, and near the bottom, a plastic cassette tape in a little cracked case. The label on the tape was handwritten, too, but this time the words were smaller, almost uncertain. June 1991. That was the summer before everything changed. The summer Dad started sleeping in the guest room. The summer Grandma stopped coming around as much. The summer my cousin Rachel, who used to visit all the time, just stopped showing up altogether. I held the tape in my hand for a long minute, my thumb tracing the edge like it might burn me. Upstairs, I found the old stereo system still gathering dust in the corner of the living room, complete with cassette player, because Grandma never threw anything away. I slipped the tape in, pressed play, and waited. It started with static. Then came the faint sound of voices, too, male and female. I recognized my father's voice first. It had that deep, tired drawl he used when he was trying not to lose his temper. The woman's voice was sharper. "Grandma, I told you this would happen," she said, voice cracking slightly, like she was holding something back. "You didn't tell me anything," Dad snapped. "You covered for me. Like always." There was silence, then a sound like someone setting a glass down too hard. "She was just a girl," he muttered, and something inside me stopped moving. Grandma didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quiet but clear. "If Hannah ever finds out, she won't," Dad interrupted. The tape ended there. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe I stopped hearing anything after that because my brain had decided to protect itself. I stood still, staring at the stereo like it might offer an explanation, like it might rewind my childhood and let me see what I missed. I didn't know what just a girl meant. I didn't want to. But the tone, the shame, the way they said it, that told me everything I needed to know without spelling it out. I ejected the tape and put it in my pocket. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, only that it couldn't stay in this house anymore. Not with her. Not while she sat upstairs and refused to speak, like her silence was penance or self-defense or both. On the way out, I passed by the hallway of family photos again. I stopped in front of one, my 10th birthday. There we all were, me, Hannah, Mom, Dad, Grandma, all smiling. But now the smiles looked wrong. Too wide, too practiced. Like they were meant to cover something just outside the frame. I drove home with the tape resting on the seat, beside me like a bomb no one had the instructions to disarm. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind scrape against the windows, and I wondered just how much poison a family could swallow before someone finally spit it out. And the worst part? I hadn't even listened to the whole tape. When I called Hannah and told her I needed to talk face to face, she hesitated for a moment longer than I expected, and in that silence, I could hear the old machinery of our family dynamic groaning back into gear. Me asking for something I couldn't quite explain, and her already deciding whether she wanted to hear the answer. Eventually, she agreed to meet at the park down the road from our old high school, the one with the peeling paint on the benches and the broken water fountain that no one ever fixed because it had become part of the place's character. It was neutral ground, public enough to prevent yelling, private enough to ruin the day if the conversation went the way I thought it might. When I got there, she was already sitting, legs crossed, sunglasses on, hair tied back tight, dressed in that way people do when they want to feel put together even if the inside of their head is on fire. She didn't look up when I approached, just stared ahead at the empty baseball field like it had something worth watching. I sat next to her and didn't speak for a few seconds. She didn't push, which was new. I found a box, I said finally, and just like that her body went stiff, like I'd pulled the safety off a weapon between us. What kind of box? She asked, too casual, the kind of voice you use when you're already trying to disprove whatever's coming. It was in the basement, I said, not meeting her eyes. Labeled Dawn, private. Grandma's handwriting. She didn't respond, but her arms tightened across her chest, and I could see the tension crawling up her neck like vines. There was a tape, I continued, slower now, watching her reaction like a lit fuse. A cassette. Dated June 1991. Dad and Grandma were on it. Talking. Her lips pressed into a line so thin it practically disappeared. What were they saying? She asked, though I could tell she already knew she didn't want the answer. I only caught pieces, I lied, not ready to hit her with the full weight of those words. He said something about she was just a girl, and Grandma said, if Hannah ever finds out, and then it cut off. She stood up so fast it startled me, sunglasses off now, her eyes darting like she needed to escape but couldn't find the exit. No, she said, shaking her head. No, Ethan. Don't do this. Not now. Not like this. Don't do what? I asked, standing too. Don't pull the thread? Don't find out what the hell happened in our family? What got buried under Grandma's silence and Mom's forced smiles and your perfect little goddamn life? She turned on me then, anger flashing like a slap. Don't turn this into some bitter middle child sob story, Ethan. You've always looked for reasons to be the victim. You want there to be some dark secret so you can say, see, I was right. I was neglected. I was overlooked. You ever think maybe there's nothing there? No, I said, heart pounding. Because I saw the way Grandma looked when I brought up Dad. It wasn't nothing. It was fear. She paced in a tight circle, chewing on her thumbnail the way she used to before big tests in high school. Even if it's true, she said, finally stopping to look at me, what do you want from me? A confession? An apology? We can't change anything now. I want the truth, I said. That's it. Just the truth. She laughed bitterly, almost choking on it. No one in this family's ever told the truth. We've been lying since before you were born. I blinked. What does that mean? She looked at me then, something raw and cracked in her expression. I used to hear them at night, she said. Dad and Grandma. Not fighting. Talking. Whispers. And sometimes I'd wake up, and he wouldn't be in the bedroom. He'd be downstairs. Or gone. And when I'd ask where he went, Mom would say he was getting air. Why didn't you ever tell me that? I asked, stunned. Because I didn't want to remember it, she said. Because if I said it out loud, it meant I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep thinking we were just a normal family with a little extra baggage. I pulled the tape from my coat pocket and held it out to her. Listen to it, I said. You deserve to know, even if it wrecks everything. She didn't take it. She looked at it like it was radioactive. I don't want it, she whispered. I don't want to know what he did. Because if it's as bad as you think, then what does that make me? The daughter of a monster? The golden child of a family built on silence. I didn't have an answer for that because I was still asking myself the same damn thing. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said. I just want you to stop pretending this didn't touch you too. She stared at the tape again, then turned and started walking toward her car. I didn't call after her. I just stood there with the cassette in my hand and the sun dipping low behind the trees, casting long shadows that looked a lot like ghosts. Back at home, I played the tape again. This time, I turned the volume up. I listened past the static, beyond the words I'd already heard, and picked up a breath, a pause, and then another sentence I hadn't caught the first time. I told her to keep quiet. Dad's voice said, low and flat. Said no one would believe her anyway. And then Grandma's voice, sharp as ever even in its tremble, she came to me. I told her she imagined it. My skin went cold. I turned off the tape. That night, I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember Rachel's face, the cousin who used to spend summers with us, until one year she just didn't come back. I remembered her laugh, her big eyes, the way she used to braid Hannah's hair and make me laugh with dumb songs she made up on the spot. And I remembered the year she stopped showing up and no one said why. I didn't need anyone to tell me anymore. I already knew. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had given up pretending that any part of the situation was still manageable and instead leaned fully into the spiral. The kind where sleep came in short gasps and coffee was just something you drank to delay the crushing weight of what you already knew but hadn't said out loud. It wasn't just about Grandma anymore, and it wasn't even really about Dad. Not exactly. It was about everything in between, the cracks in the foundation that nobody wanted to see because then they'd have to admit the whole damn house was leaning. I hadn't spoken to Hannah since the park, and even though she hadn't said it, I knew she was trying to pretend this conversation had never happened, as if burying the tape in the bottom drawer of her conscience could somehow silence it. I sat in my apartment for what felt like hours, listening to the tape again, this time with headphones on, the hiss and crackle close enough to my ears that I felt like I was inside the memory, not just eavesdropping on it. I played that awful line over and over. She came to me. I told her she imagined it. I mouthed the words like they were part of a ritual, like maybe if I repeated them enough times, I could unhear them, but that's not how poison works. It doesn't weaken the more you taste it. It gets deeper into your system, waiting to hit when you think you've built up some kind of resistance. Around noon, I made a decision I'd been circling for days, the kind of decision that feels like pressing your hand against a bruise just to see how bad it hurts. I logged into Facebook and searched for Rachel. I didn't know if she still used her old name, didn't know if she was married, didn't even know if she'd want to hear from me, but after a few minutes, I found a profile that looked right, same last name. Slightly older. Her face sharper now, but still familiar in that way people are when you've seen them frozen in childhood photos for most of your adult life. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, because no matter how much you prepare yourself for the truth, there's still that moment where you realize truth has teeth. I messaged her just one line, not even really knowing what I wanted to say. Hey, it's Ethan. I found something. Can we talk? I stared at the screen for a full 30 minutes, heart thudding in that slow, panicked rhythm that always comes right before you open a door you're not sure should have been opened at all. Eventually, a reply came back. Just one sentence. I told your grandmother. She said I imagined it. My whole body went cold. Not shocked, because deep down I already knew, but cold in the way people get when there's no room left to lie to yourself. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen like the words might change if I looked long enough, but they didn't. They stayed right there, simple and devastating. That night, I drove back to my mother's house, even though I hadn't warned her I was coming. The lights were on, the TV flickering behind the curtains, and for a moment I almost drove past, the weight in my chest too heavy to lift. But I parked anyway, walked up to the door, and rang the bell. She answered in her slippers, wearing that worn-out cardigan she always pulled on when she didn't want to be asked how she was feeling. "Ethan," she said, surprised. "What are you?" "I need to talk," I said. "Now." "About Dad." She stepped aside without asking more, which was strange for her, and we sat down in the kitchen like we used to when I was a kid and came home with a scraped knee or a failing grade. I placed the cassette on the table between us, like an offering or a threat. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. "About what happened." "About Rachel." Her face changed, not shocked, not offended, but resigned, like she'd been waiting for this conversation for years and praying it never came. "I suspected," she said, her voice so soft I barely heard it. "But your grandmother made it clear it wasn't something to pursue." "She told Rachel she imagined it," I said. "She said it was nothing." "She told all of us it was nothing," my mother said, looking away. "Your father, he had problems. But he was my husband, Ethan. And back then, there were things you didn't want to believe." "She was 13, I said, feeling my throat tighten. "You let her vanish from our lives. You let Grandma sweep her under the rug like trash." "I didn't know what to do," she said, tears brimming now. "I didn't know how to break everything apart and still survive it. So you let silence protect him," I said. "And now it's killing her." She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. The room felt smaller than it ever had, like the walls were inching closer, trying to trap us inside the old narrative where no one had to admit what they'd done or failed to do. "I'm going to see Grandma," I said, standing. "I'm going to say the things she wouldn't let anyone else say." My mother didn't stop me. She just nodded, like she finally understood that the time for pretending was over and that maybe it had always been. When I arrived at the house, Grandma was in her chair, staring at the wall like it was telling her a story she couldn't bear to hear. I sat across from her and pulled out the tape. I didn't play it. I just held it in my hand. "I talked to Rachel," I said. "She remembers everything." No response. "You could have helped her. You could have helped us." Still nothing, not even a blink. "I think your silence is the only thing keeping you alive now," I said. "Because once you speak it, once you admit what you protected, there's no coming back." And for the first time in weeks, her eyes moved. Slowly, carefully, they looked at me, not angry, not scared, just empty. I stood, placed the tape on the table beside her, and walked out. She hadn't said a word, but she didn't need to. She'd already said enough. I didn't know what I expected to happen when I left that cassette sitting beside Grandma's chair, but a small, quiet part of me hoped she would play it after I left, maybe alone in the dark while the house exhaled around her. Maybe with trembling hands and her jaw clenched against the weight of her own memory, but she didn't move while I was there, and when I returned the next day, it was still sitting exactly where I'd left it, untouched, as if even the idea of hearing her own voice trapped in a moment she could no longer rewrite was too much to bear. There's something cruel about time, how it erodes responsibility until all that's left is a brittle silence, the kind that cracks when you step too hard or speak too loud, and now I was stomping through it like a goddamn marching band. Hannah met me there that afternoon, still refusing to look me fully in the eye, as if one glance might confirm all the things we'd both been trying not to say out loud. She stood in the doorway like she was afraid of crossing the threshold. Like entering the house meant accepting that the woman who'd once taught us how to make pie crust from scratch and threatened us with soap if we swore in the living room had also helped bury something so ugly and irreversible it could never be forgotten. Not really. Not by anyone who heard the truth in full. "She hasn't said anything?" Hannah asked, and I shook my head. "Not a word," I said. "But she listens. She hears every goddamn syllable. She just doesn't want to respond to it." Hannah nodded, and I could see how exhausted she looked, not just physically but in her bones, in her spirit, like something heavy was trying to take root, and she didn't know how to fight it off. She stepped inside finally, walking past me and into the living room, where Grandma sat in her throne of silence, her gaze still fixed on that blank patch of wall like it held a door to someplace she could vanish into and never come back from. We didn't sit right away. We didn't speak to her like we usually did, those fake greetings and stiff smiles we'd been taught to deliver out of politeness, even to people we didn't trust anymore. Instead, we just stood there, two adults who used to be children in this house, now surrounded by furniture that felt like it had been watching everything from the corners for decades. "I listened to the tape," Hannah said quietly, almost a whisper. "All of it this time." I turned to her, surprised, and she nodded before I could ask. "It took me 3 tries," she said. "First I got angry, then I got sick, and then I couldn't stop crying. After that, I started shaking and couldn't sleep. And then finally, I listened again, and I stopped feeling anything at all." "She protected him," I said. "Even after what he did." "She made Rachel think she imagined it. And Mom didn't do a damn thing either," Hannah added, bitterness twisting her mouth. "She just stayed quiet, same as always." "Maybe she thought it would go away if nobody said it out loud," I offered, not as an excuse, but as a bleak theory. "It never goes away," Hannah said. "It just infects everything else." We looked at Grandma then, and for the first time, she looked back. Really looked. Her eyes met Hannah's, and something flickered there, recognition, shame, something close to apology, but far too late to mean anything. "You're not going to say anything, are you?" Hannah asked her directly, her voice flat and cold. "You're just going to sit there and take this to your grave?" Grandma blinked slowly, but didn't move. "I used to think you were the strongest woman I knew," Hannah continued, voice trembling now. "I thought you were brave because you survived so much. But now I think you were just a coward in pearls." That made Grandma flinch. Just slightly. Just enough to prove the words weren't lost on her. I stepped forward then, not out of courage, but because I couldn't stand the quiet anymore. I crouched in front of her, the same way I used to when I was little and wanted her to look me in the eye before she punished me. "Why did you protect him?" I asked. "Why did you let her suffer so you wouldn't have to face what he was?" Still nothing. No sound. No movement. "You ruined all of us," I whispered. "And now you want us to believe the silence is penance. But it's just more control. You're still controlling the story by refusing to tell it." Her lip quivered for the first time in weeks. That was all. We left the house not long after that, walking into the bitter wind like it could scrape off the weight of everything we'd just said. We didn't speak in the car. We didn't even listen to music. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the occasional breath like a sob caught in the throat. Later that night, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling again, replaying everything. The tape. Rachel's message. Hannah's voice cracking when she said the word coward. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I remembered something small, a detail from a summer long ago, the way Rachel used to sit on the porch swing, twisting the chain around her wrist until the skin turned red, staring into the yard like she was waiting for someone to come back and apologize. No one ever did. And the next morning, she was gone. The truth wasn't a moment, it was 1,000 little moments we'd ignored. The looks, the whispers, the closed doors, the missing girl. And now the woman who could have confirmed it all sat in a chair like a statue built from her own guilt. Silent. Unmoving. Unforgiven. Grandma died 2 weeks later on a Thursday morning that felt so normal it almost offended me, the kind of soft, sun-dappled day where the world seems determined to carry on like nothing happened, like someone's last breath can be taken and the sky won't even flinch. I found out through Hannah, who called me around 9 with a voice that was steadier than I expected, though not without the cracks you get when something breaks inside you but hasn't quite finished falling apart yet. She said the nurse at the care center called her first, that Grandma had passed in her sleep, peaceful, quiet, the way everyone always says they want to go, like dying silently in your bed is the ultimate grace after a life that might not have earned it. She never spoke again after Thanksgiving. Not one word. Not to me. Not to Hannah. Not even to the doctors or the social worker who came to evaluate her mental state after she stopped responding to basic questions. They ruled out stroke, dementia, all the usual culprits. Her body was fine, but her mind had just shut down. Or maybe it had gone inward, somewhere deep and locked away, someplace only she had the key to. And now she'd taken that key with her into the dirt, buried it with her pearls and her brittle bones, and that last shred of dignity she clung to even as her legacy rotted from the inside out. The funeral was small, like she would have wanted it, or at least that's what Mom said, though none of us really knew what Grandma wanted anymore because none of us truly knew who she was. The woman in the casket bore a faint resemblance to the one who used to knit sweaters in the winter and demand thank you cards be written within 48 hours of receiving a gift, but she also looked like someone I'd never met. Someone who had lived an entirely different life behind the thin veil of family dinners and birthday cake smiles. Hannah and I stood side by side at the gravesite while the minister mumbled through the eulogy like he'd pulled it off a template, mentioning her strength and devotion, her role as a cornerstone of the family. I almost laughed, actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from letting it out because cornerstone was such a pretty word for someone who had quietly let a child get broken and then convinced the world it never happened. I didn't say anything during the service. Neither did Hannah. We just watched as the casket was lowered into the earth and the people who hadn't seen her in years wiped tears from their eyes like they'd lost a saint. Afterward, we gathered in Mom's kitchen, the same place we'd had Christmases and Easter brunches and all those empty traditions that feel so heavy once you know the truth behind the people who made them. There were casseroles and pound cake and coffee, and everyone spoke in soft voices, sharing sanitized stories about Grandma, how she was tough but fair, how she always had peppermints in her purse, how she never missed a church service unless she was sick. Nobody mentioned Rachel. Nobody mentioned the tape. And nobody dared to ask why 2 of her grandchildren had shown up with eyes full of things they'd never say in public. That night, back at my apartment, I sat on the floor with the cassette in my hands, the plastic already starting to yellow at the edges, like even it was tired of holding the weight of what it contained. I didn't play it again. I didn't need to. I knew every word now, every pause, every terrible syllable etched into my memory, like it had been tattooed there. I thought about burning it. I thought about smashing it with a hammer or tossing it into the river just to watch it sink and pretend the truth could drown like the rest of us. But I didn't. Instead, I slid it into a small envelope and placed it in the back of my filing cabinet, behind tax documents and expired insurance cards, because part of me still didn't know what to do with it. Part of me hoped one day someone else would find it, someone younger, someone who hadn't grown up drinking poison disguised as iced tea at Sunday dinners, and maybe they'd listen to it and say, "Now I understand." Or maybe they'd destroy it. Either option felt better than pretending it never existed. Hannah and I don't talk much anymore. Not because we hate each other, not exactly, but because there's nothing left to say. We see each other at the occasional family function, nod from across the room, keep things light. But we both know what lives between us now. It's not resentment. It's not forgiveness either. It's something harder to name. A shared wound that never scabbed over, too wide to ignore, too old to properly treat. Mom still acts like nothing happened. She calls once a week to tell me about her neighbor's dog or her new crockpot recipe, never once asking if I'm okay, never once mentioning Grandma beyond a soft sigh and a sentence that usually starts with, "She meant well." I let her talk. I let her keep her version. She needs it more than I need to challenge it. Some nights, I dream about Rachel. I dream about her standing at the edge of the porch, twisting the swings chain around her wrist, looking at me with those wide eyes like she's trying to say something but can't. And when I wake up, I sit in the dark and try to imagine the life she might have had if anyone had listened. If Grandma had believed her. If Dad had been stopped. If I had known, if I had done something, if all those tiny moments of silence had been broken before they hardened into cement. But that's the thing about family secrets. They don't die with the people who kept them. They echo. They repeat. They haunt the next generation with whispers and guilt and the unbearable weight of what could have been prevented. Grandma never confessed. She never cried. Never spoke. Not once. And maybe that was her final victory, controlling the story by refusing to finish it. Taking her silence to the grave like a medal she earned for enduring her own cowardice. But the thing about silence is that it only works until someone decides to speak. And I'm still deciding. Because some truths deserve to be shouted from rooftops, even if they land like bricks on the people listening. Others? Maybe they're better buried in the dirt beside the ones who couldn't face them.